Hello and welcome everybody back to Mana on the Rocks. It is I, your host Joe, joining me as always, my co-host Atlas.
Hello again.
All right, this week we got a pretty interesting one. What is this? Opinion-based conversation on this podcast? Crazy.
We would never do that.
We would never. We're talking about the health of the format and overall general state of things. You know, is CDH doom and gloom, or is it magical, happy, sunshine, rainbows, and Christmas?
I think for the most part, we're in Christmas land right now.
I never leave Christmas land. My combos are always online. My opponents don't have the outs, and I have everything because I'm just a god gamer. So why don't you come on down, get a drink with us?
What do you need a tender for?
Calamax.
Oh, that makes sense. 3 pips on the Mander.
Yeah, so it lets me cast Calamax and then hold up interaction.
Right on curve, right? You go
right on curve.
You go land, dork, land, tender, interaction spell, and then you go another land, tap land, dork, land, Calamax, and then
hold open teamer. Yeah,
that's sweet.
So
I like that a lot. That seems like a good play pattern.
Yeah. So right now I have Carpet of Flowers in that slot, which I don't know how I like. I don't think I like Carpet in the deck.
Carpet's just been falling off a lot. It's just really slow, I think.
Fine, I think in like mono green or like other decks. I don't think it needs to be here. Or like I think if you're doing like Sanctum Weaver and like you care about enchantments more, which is I think what like version 1 of the deck was.
Yeah, I remember you were on Weaver in version 1.
Yeah. It's kind of whatever. But it's just in there for right now, just to have something in the slot. Because initially I was planning on having Carpet in the deck, and then I put in Dryad Arbor. And I'm just like, Dryad Arbor is just better.
Yeah.
Especially since I'm on the Triome.
Yeah, that makes sense. You got extra untaps.
Yeah, I can go turn 1 Dryad Arbor, turn 2 fetch into Triome, and then be able to use the Triome.
Well, that leads into sort of what we're talking about today, I guess, is like CDH meta and sort of like where the format's sitting right now, at least as we're perceiving it, right?
Yeah. How the meta is it good? Is it bad?
What's being played? What is not very good right now? What is like in a really good position?
Yeah, just general health of the format. Is it in a good spot? Are there like bad things that are really happening? Underrepresentation, overrepresentation. I was thinking a lot about this, like ever since it was like I suggested I wanted to do this topic. I feel like the format's really, really healthy. I think apart from like a couple of things that pull away from, like I guess the creative aspects of it.
But those aren't even like decks. They're like strategies, right?
Yeah, and even then, like I don't think they're terrible. I just dislike them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and those are just the really like very generic things like Dockside, Thoracle, Breach. I'm sure there's something that I'm not thinking about right off the top of my head because I don't see it a lot. But yeah, it's just those things where you see them and like you're playing this, okay, then we know you're playing that.
Exactly.
Displacer Kitten's starting to get up there. It's very heavily played.
That's so fucking funny. Fucking funny.
Yeah, we talked about that before. Oh, this card's unplayable. 4 mana.
Yeah.
But
4 mana, it does nothing on ETB, doesn't protect itself.
Yeah, bad. But yeah, so I think there's that. I was actually looking at that a lot like the yesterday and I guess a little bit on Sunday even. I was talking to some people because I was playing in an event on Sunday, and we were talking about like what the meta looks like and things like that. And now with Punt City 2 having just concluded this past weekend as well.
That was this weekend.
Yeah, there's a lot of new metadata. My favorite reveal from a lot of the data that's been coming in recently from a number of events, but I'll just pull specifically from Punt City, is that Winota does not appear to be doing as well as it has in the past. It's not super well positioned, which I am loving that. I haven't even had to deal with it, but I love that.
Yeah, if anything, Winota, at least in our local meta, has been dying down, and we've been seeing a massive uptick of Yuriko.
Yes.
Which makes sense. I think Winota and Yuriko are two of the easiest decks to get into like CDH proper with.
Pretty accessible, yeah.
Yeah, like you don't need like a lot of things. You don't need a lot of like in-depth knowledge. Like they're pretty like understood, built, pretty accessible. If you don't have the expensive cards, you don't need the expensive cards. Like it's just it's just kind of good. It's
Yeah,
just kind of good.
yeah, and they're totally strong. They're
Oh yeah.
so able to compete. Even budget versions are more than able to compete at a high level, just because their strategies are very simplistic. Makes it sound bad, but it's not. Like they're just very direct. It's
Yeah.
just very much this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to do it, and I'm exceptionally good at it.
Hmm.
And for Yuriko, that's like tempo, and for Winota, that's
That's everything that's not
aggro
tempo.
stacks. Yeah,
It's everything
everything
that's not
else
tempo.
that is not combo,
Yeah.
but that is not tempo. Yeah, but apparently, at least from a lot of the reports I was reading, is basically Winota is such a known quantity at this point that everyone is just aware. Winota is the boogeyman, more or less. Like you just don't let them
Hmm.
get a foothold. You kill their enablers. You kill Winota before she can go to combat. You just don't let them have that attack, because if you let them have one, they will have more.
Exactly. You said the word that's synonymous with format health, and that's boogeyman. I'd say Winota is definitely a boogeyman of the format. I wouldn't necessarily say it's like the worst thing. I think like some of the more egregious things of the past,
Oh, for
like
sure.
hole breacher, flash, those kinds of things, way more relevant, way more like boogeyman esque.
Even
But
Leovold for the
yeah,
short period
even
that that was
Leovold to some
legal.
extent. Like all of those are way more scary to me than anything Winota does. Winota dies to any removal spell twice, and then you're just kind of playing like a white red stacks beatdown, which is like it's good.
It's still viable.
It's
It's
still
still
very
viable
viable.
at that point, which
Like
is
it still
crazy.
it still has ways to play through a lot of different stacks. I think pretty much all the builds are on Mogcatcher these days, which as soon as I heard that they were wanting Mogcatcher, I'm like, that's correct. That seems like a good play.
Yep. Yep.
Because it gets around all your stacks pieces, gets around all of the rule of laws.
Yep.
The only
Just
thing you
dumps
get fucked,
Dockside, dumps Kiki.
like it's just good.
So
It's just
strong.
good.
Well,
Um,
it's great because Winota dumps your like zealous conscripts and your combat
mhm,
celebrant into play, and then you just like, oh, I guess I'll go tutor up Kiki. You play two
exactly.
copies of it effectively.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I'd say Yuriko is one of the more like standout commanders for like, okay, we have to like mandatory, you have to pick like 3 commanders to go on the ban list, right? There's an argument, there's like a solid argument for Winota. If like in this proposed scenario where like we're forced to put 3 legendary creatures on the ban list,
That aren't already there.
yeah, that weren't already there, like there is a solid argument there. Do I think it's necessary? No, I don't think so. I don't I don't think there's any commander that like needs to be on the ban list right now.
I would agree with
At
that.
least at least it's not already on there. I think the ones that are on there.
Yeah,
Eh,
the only legendary creature that I could think that like you could there is actually like a real argument for putting on there, and even then it's super tenuous, and it's like not
mhm.
because the card's too busted, but it would just be Crom, just because that card's like very strong. It's a
Yeah,
partner, sees a lot of
yeah.
play. And it's like, not saying it should be banned, not
Mhm.
at all. But if I had to ban a legendary creature, it'd be Crom, just because like Blue Farm is such a popular deck, and Crom gets played in a ton of other builds anyways.
Yeah.
So like if you play like Teamer, like there's
Mhm.
Thrasios Crom, or you got like there are a couple of Izzet builds that run it.
Mhm.
There's Grixis shells that run it. Like it's just like Tevish Crom, like it's a very very strong card,
Yeah.
not busted at any rate, but very strong. And it's a partner that provides you a super solid support pair of colors with
Mhm.
any other partner commander just to get for a color.
Yeah. I have an issue with banning just Crom if we want to look at the partners. It's very close to like Golos almost. Like if the whole I think the argument that the RC gave was for diversity, was the
Yeah,
reason they
yeah,
banned Golos,
yep.
even though like Najeela's still around, Kenny's still around.
Oh,
Like
I'm not saying it should be, but that's like
oh yeah,
it's
but
if you're talking
it's
CDH.
yeah, yeah, but I think if you look at just because I think if any of the partners get banned, it's for CDH. That's the only
Yeah,
time
that's
it's
the only.
relevant.
It's reasonable too.
Like
Yeah.
yeah, like any of the other partners, I think apart from the like known CDH ones are like totally fine and like see play at the casual level. And they do like completely different things that CDH doesn't care about. But I think if you want to look at the partners, I think you have to go after the big four: Crom, Thrasios, Timna.
Just hit them
So
all at once.
yeah, just I think if you want to hit the partners, you have to hit them all because
Scary.
the other ones just like it's just a power vacuum at that point. Like everything just like what's the next best partner? The only ones that aren't banned.
That's totally fair.
But like that's ban list discussion,
Yeah,
and
that's a different episode. We don't need to get
yeah,
into it. And realistically, there's nothing that really super needs to be banned right now. Like we
no,
said, the format overall we think is in a pretty healthy spot.
yeah, and
Um,
if the RC thinks that Dockside is like not in their sights, then I think the format's generally in a healthy spot. I think I say that I still think I want to see Thoracle gone, just because I think 3 mana for the win condition is an abysmally small rate, and the package is so tight, and you can play around it. I'd like to see it gone personally, just to give credence to any other win condition in the format. Now, the argument goes like if you ban Thoracle, something obviously takes its place, Blabman, whatever. But I still think the argument of like I still think there's an argument for Thoracle to be gone, even though like well obviously always going to be a best thing to do in the format. That everyone's pretty knowledgeable of like what the best things to do in the format are. But I think Thoracle is just a really efficient, really tight, definitely tricky to play around. Not unbeatable, just tricky to play around. I just like to see it go.
that's
Uh,
totally fair. Oh, you want to hear something else that was cool at Punt
yep.
City? I was
Yeah.
reading
Yep.
these like the top 16s and stuff. There was
Mhm.
a Tevish Thrasios list at top 16. That was pretty cool.
Okay.
They were playing
Okay.
like Displacer Kitten and they're playing some cool cards. I think there were like 2 or 3 Tivits that were in there, but
Really?
yeah, only one Winota got into the top 16, I believe.
Yeah.
I didn't see any Yurikos on the list when I glanced through it yesterday.
Anything
Um,
like crazy spicy?
um, I think there was a Jund Dargo list. I think there was Dargo Ikra, which isn't like super spicy. Like
No,
it's not the most original deck in the world, but it's way more original than most of the other lists that were on there.
that's true.
Oh no, there was a Niv Mizzet list. That was really cool. There was a Niv
Six
Mizzet Parun.
mana.
Yeah,
6 mana. Okay.
yeah. For those who don't know, Niv Mizzet the Parun is it's 6 mana. It's blue, red for a 5/5 with flying that cannot be countered. It's a dragon wizard, and whenever you draw a card, whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell, you must draw a card, and then whenever you draw a card, you are permitted to shoot something for 1 damage. I believe is what it says.
Yes, it's 1 damage
Yes.
to any target.
So it goes infinite with Curiosity and Ophidian Eye and all of those style of effects. And then otherwise, it's sort of just like a red-blue control deck. You can play Breach, Diamond, things like that in there because they fit into the shell. But yeah, it was pretty cool. I looked at the list. It was pretty neat. It was cool to see a commander that was 2 colors representing that wasn't Winota.
Mm-hmm.
So that was
No
kind of
monocolor
neat.
decks making the cut.
I
Actually, no.
didn't.
I think I found the deck list. I can actually take a look right now.
Yeah, I don't think I saw any in there. I don't believe there were any monocolored lists that made the top 16. But there were something like 168 players, so really great turnout. Shout out to Boston Roll. Congratulations on winning yet another major event. Second time taking it down with Blue Farm. I think there were like
That's
I think there were like
back-to-back
3.
punt cities that he's taken
Yeah,
down. Then,
yeah, he's taking down both with the more or less the same list. The list that he was playing today was a little bit different. He was on Containment Priest, which is a card that I think is super well positioned in the meta right now.
Yeah, super good. It hoses Yuriko. It hoses. No, it does. Does it hose Yuriko?
But it does hose Winota.
Hoses Winota.
It
Hoses
just like
Breach.
yeah, it abolishes anything that is trying to cheat creatures into play. Because Containment Priest is a 1 white pip, 1 colorless pip, 2/2 human cleric, has flash, and has a static ability. If a non-token creature would enter the battlefield and it was not cast, that creature is exiled instead of entering the battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
So it's fantastic. It hoses Displacer Kitten strategies, anything that reanimates, any type of like cheating effect with evolutions, pods, things like that. It just says you're either going to fail to find or I'm going to exile your creature if you don't, like, if you for whatever reason decide to not fail to find.
It should hose Yuriko going when you ninjutsu Yuriko.
Yes,
you're not
yes, it hoses Yuriko on the ninjutsu. Yeah, sorry, I didn't think about that. But yeah, it's a really strong card. A lot of people like it's an old one. A lot of people have forgotten that card exists.
I think that kind of leads into another like health of the format thing. Like I think that there are enough like knobs and switches and dials and like cards that people can play if there are problems in the format that you can just play those cards and the power level of Cedh is such that it's not hard to access these cards, depending on your colors. I think pretty much every color that you could play in that has those like those like silver bullet type pieces, you have enough ways of accessing them. Even more so if you're in like black or like white colors or red colors or any color really.
Yeah.
It's so easy to access those things that I don't I don't know. I think that feeds into like we're going to just see Cedh kind of just regulate and cycle through itself. I mean, we're kind of exiting out of I think mid range ish. We're still mid range, but we're definitely seeing more
of a turbo era right now.
Yeah. I think we're starting to speed up again, which means we're going to start seeing stacks on the rise. And once stacks is on the rise, we're going to see mid range on the rise, and we're just going to keep rock paper scissors.
Yeah, but there was Manala's coming back. That deck's really fast.
Yeah. Oh god, that commander. Shout out to our Anala player, Jaden.
Yeah. I had to play against one of those this weekend. It was really interesting.
Actually, you were at like would you consider it a major tournament in our area?
It was bigger. It was
bigger?
The prize pool was pretty large.
Okay.
But it was a lot of fun. Me and a couple of other players from our shop went there this past weekend. We played in that. It was Sunday, so same day as PC2. So there wasn't like a bunch of players. I think a lot of players went to Punt City who might have showed up otherwise, because there was a 64 player cap and they only got to like 28. So about half capacity, not the worst in the world. Okay. Especially since they didn't advertise it super heavily, and they're competing
that one
with
came
like a
out
super
like
major.
Nowhere for our area.
Yeah, but it was a lot of fun. There were some really high quality players there. There were a bunch of neat decks on display for all of the blue farmy cringeness that showed up. So that was I don't know. Anytime Blue Farm loses, even if I'm not winning the pod, I consider that a dub, because the deck is so good, and it is probably the most, if one of the most, if not the most played deck in the format right now.
Yeah.
Just because it is just so generically good. Gets access to the two best combos, being Breach and Thoracle, and has access to some insane colors.
Has access to some of all the best cards in the game.
Yeah, and there's a lot of room to like tune it to the meta as well, as we can see with Bosch going on to Containment Priest and playing Lavinia and like some weird cards that you don't see in all of the other blue farm lists, just because they seem really strong in the meta, right? So I think there were like maybe 4 blue farm decks out of that 28, so it was pretty healthy. But there were also some really cool decks that showed up. Like I was playing Chainveil Teferi. There was someone else there playing Chainveil Teferi, so that was really neat. We had slightly different builds, got to talk shop with them, so that was fun. But there was Atraxa Food Chain, was one of our players. There was a Mad Farm list. There was a Curious Control build. That was pretty cool.
Wait, like OG Curious Control? That's crazy.
They cut the curiosity out, but I was using it as a slang term for Thrasios and Vile Smasher.
Gotcha.
But it was not a build that I was super familiar with. It was like a lot of value mid-range grind stuff, and then some control and things. It was sweet.
Okay.
There was an Elsha deck there. Ooh. There was I'm trying to think of the other things I saw. There was an Anala player. There were like 2 Kinnan players. Crick made an appearance. We had our local Izzet player on Gearson played and did really well. He did really well. He took down the top seeded player in the tournament. Their only loss before the cut was to our boy on Gearson.
Let's go.
So that was pretty cool.
Every time I see him
game
play
one
that deck,
knocked everyone apart.
Every time I see him play that deck, I'm like, this deck's kind of sweet.
Yeah,
it does a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, it's really neat, and so he did really well. He got 2 out of his 4 games. I think he went 2-1-1. I think he might have drawn the last one. I'm not exactly sure. Don't quote me on that. But so he did well. And then what else? There was like one other deck that I saw that I was like, oh, that's different. That's pretty neat. But I am blanking on what it is right now. Anyways, yeah, there was some good representation. So like going back to the whole health of the format thing, like you see a lot of different decks showing up, even if a super majority of them are blue farm. It's unfortunate in my opinion, that like there is one deck that is more or less the best, but that's not to say that other decks couldn't win in the slightest.
I mean, given enough time, there's always going to be a deck that rises to the top of any format given enough time with not a lot of like substantial change, which I'd argue Cedh hasn't had like substantial change
Nothing ground shaking in the past
since
year, I
the
would
Hull
argue.
Breacher ban, maybe, probably.
More or less, I would say. I think Displacer is probably the most like
Yeah.
shakeup we've had, just because it enables a bunch of different win conditions now.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think there's been anything like that has rocked the format probably since the whole
No,
Breacher ban.
definitely we've had a lot of like really good like flavor of the month type things that have proven to have staying power. Things like Tivit, especially. I
Yeah,
think of any of the new commanders that came out in the last year, Tivit is the one that has stuck around the most. Save for probably some of like the background pairings, like anything like Abdel in the command zone, or like playing the Candlekeep Sage, like kind of flickering
mm-hmm.
shenanigans, or stuff like that, or even some of the more like crazier brews that I've seen out there. I think there's a couple of like red black one. There's Barakos that does like polymorph the background into breach, which is funny.
Yeah.
That deck is very
That
funny.
deck is very unique. I think that's pretty
But
cool.
like like Tivit's probably the one that has come out recently that has like had the most staying power. But apart from that, it's mostly been par for the course. We've had some cool tech things come up, some more interaction pop up, things like offer, stuff like that. But I'd say by and large, CDH has largely been at like a standstill.
It's
I
been
think
pretty. I would say stable is a good word
stable,
for
yeah,
it.
stable, yeah.
Like
That's the word I'm looking for.
no earth-shattering card has come out that's just like turned the meta on its head.
Yeah,
Um,
which
no,
I
nothing.
think is a very good thing. I think is a
Yeah,
very hard thing to pull off.
and they've also released no commanders where it's like, I mean, Tivit's strong, but they
Mm-hmm.
haven't released any one particular thing where it's like this is going to come out, and now like on release everyone is like, oh, this is the best commander, and now everyone is going to be playing that,
Yeah,
which is once again a healthy thing.
I think that is very healthy. There are definitely like some fringe things. Like I think you can argue homogenization until like the end of time, but at a certain point you have to recognize if you're playing a part of the format where we have such a deep card pool, there's going to be very obviously better choices than other cards, and the power level of those decks
Yeah.
requires you to be on the stronger side of that.
Well, until we get to Splinter Twin levels, I don't think we
Yeah.
need to worry about homogenization
Yeah.
too much.
And like at like a local
Until
tournament,
38% of your format is playing one specific deck, and the other like 48 is playing a deck that is supposed to have a
counters
good
it.
matchup against
Yeah.
that deck. Then
Yeah.
I think we're at a pretty good point.
Yeah, we're at a pretty good spot. Like if like we can like if you can count on like Winota being a deck to be there, the Yurikos of the world, the Blue Farms of the world, the 4-color, 5-color piles of the world.
I would agree. Oh, I just remembered what the other cool deck to finish in top 16
Yep.
was.
What was that?
You are a Rakdos player, so you'll be
Oh.
happy to hear that Florian is putting up results.
Is it okay? I think that's the same guy that
Yes.
also got top 16 with Florian. I really like his list.
It's very cool.
It's very cool. I like Florian a lot. Florian is in the 99 of Chainer, and it's a fantastic card in Chainer. Every single time I see it, I'm like, this card's sweet.
It's great.
Florian's really good. It's just a Timna effect in Rakdos, which is a really good effect to have in Rakdos. Turns out, like it's a more aggressive slant than what like Prosper tries to do, but it doesn't like super hard lock you out of your resources like Prosper does. You don't get the mana advantage, obviously. Like there's differences there, but no, Florian's super duper sweet. I'll have to check out his list and see if he's come up with any new spice, because I think he's mostly just on like the standard Rakdos stuff.
Yeah,
Again,
I was chatting with him a little bit, and
Mhm.
he had some cool ideas.
Okay,
his deck is sweet, so
that's awesome. No, I think as we've gotten like more tournaments and as CDH has grown more, I want to say most of the major tournaments within like at least the last 6 months have had like varying degrees of like who is won and like the makeup and the texture, like the top cut. I think Bosch Roll is the exception, winning back to back with Blue Farm.
He's just a very good player. There's that.
I was going to say that's probably on the player. Like 60-40 player to the deck. Something like that. I think that's probably fair. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But yeah, I think if we're seeing all these tournaments and people are coming up with new, or not necessarily new ways, but we're not seeing like the same like percentile of decks in the top cut, that's a good thing. I think that's a very good thing. I think it makes it hard to like prepare for, but again, as we kind of discussed in win cons, like everyone's playing mostly the same win cons, just with like a different shell.
Which I think honestly that's fine. Like prepare for the win conditions, and then have a different way to get to your own version of whatever that win condition is.
Mm-hmm.
If you're playing something particularly unique, that's sweet. And there is definitely something to that whole idea of a rogue deck will can take down a tournament. Just because people don't know how to prepare for you. So
and sometimes it happens. I mean, we've seen Magda basically fall off the face of the earth.
Yeah.
You're a Teferi player now, so
I am. I have been a Teferi player since he was released. I was on him since basically he came out. But the deck's undergone a lot of changes since then, and I can't take credit for really any of them. But that said, it did take down last year the first Cash Cards Unlimited event and won a Black Lotus, so that's pretty cool. But I've made some changes of my own to the list. I've been playing that, having a lot of fun, have a lot of success with it, just because you're on a very unique win condition. It's hard to prepare for. You get stopped by a lot of common stacks pieces, but like at the same time, because you're mono blue, you don't. Yeah, exactly. Like who doesn't fold to a rule of law, other than like maybe like Kenrith and maybe like one or two others, Winota, like one or two other decks, right? You're going to need to remove it at some point. But Teferi's in a cool spot. It's in a really good position right now with the current, like, just overall composition of there are, like, 2 to 3 or 4 really, like, dedicated win conditions that people are playing in almost every deck. So it's easy to side in tech. Historically, blue has a pretty good matchup against green. And I know I've talked with you about this before, but the overall meta, at least in my experience, is, in spite of blue farm, very green heavy. Because it seems to me that most decks these days are either blue farm, meaning that they're like some sort of like Grixis or Grixis plus white shell that's on breach stuff, or Winota / Yuriko, so some sort of like aggressive tempo style, Staxy style of deck. And if they're not one of those two things, then the most of the rest of the meta is a dork deck. You're playing green so that you get access to some great ramp in the form of dorks. It also gives you access to Collect Roof and some other stacks pieces, which can be really strong depending on your build. And so because of that, Teferi and a couple of other decks, like Magda actually, I think right now, are pretty well positioned. Magda less so because dorks block Magda. She's a 2/1. But aside from that, like Teferi gets to play a Curse Totem, which is an effect that just hoses all of those dork decks. Hoses Kiki Jiki. It hoses just like so many things, right? It also gets to play Grafdigger's Cage because you're not casting anything from your graveyard or your library, which hoses the rest of those decks. Torpor Orb stops Thoracle, so it gets to play all these hate pieces that don't affect it. Back to basics, things like that. Things that
Stasis. It just gets to raw play Stasis.
If you want to play Stasis, you can be on Stasis, which is sweet. But
that's a card that not many decks are able to win through or play.
No, not at all. I'm not currently on it, but it has come in and out of my list just as a holdover from the old builds.
Definitely meta call. I think it's a meta call card.
Yeah, I think like if you're in a heavy aggro meta, I can for sure see Stasis. Like if Winota or Yuriko or like some other decks like are very like that pressure life totals that attack a lot to gain advantage, even Tymna decks to some extent. I could see Stasis being a very viable option. There are like 2 flex slots in my list right now, and I can see that being a very viable card to put in just as a way to stop that, even if it's not tutorable. Because most of our stacks pieces are tutorable because they're artifacts, but we have a couple like back to basics that unfortunately you just have to draw into. But that variance is made up for by the fact that they're just insanely strong. And
if you have them, like you're in very hard control of the game.
Oh yeah, and the great thing about it is that because you're mono blue and you're not winning the game fast, like, well, okay, we'll talk about that later. But Teferi is mono blue turbo. But if you're in mono blue, generally people are much more likely to let you resolve a stacks piece than you are in, say, like red white or something, right? Because your
Yeah.
stacks pieces aren't really your win conditions, whereas their stacks pieces like are going to beat you to death. Like an Archon of Emeria, given enough time, can just kill you if you're not taking any game actions, and all your lands
Not
are
going to
empty
get that
taps
way
and
with
everything.
back to basics or stasis.
Well, that's the thing is like usually there's like one or two players. Like there's enough players at the table who have a basic in play or who have lands untapped or rocks or something to play around it. They're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna let that resolve because it hosts the other guy more. And in some cases, they might even help you defend it. I know that actually came up in the game that our Gearson player won, the other Teferi at that tournament. Cast a back to basics. Gearson had 4 basic lands, and there were 2 counterspells aimed at that bad boy, and Gearson and the Teferi player together defended the back to basics. And that led to the Gearson player's win. So
yeah,
pretty sweet.
I forget when we talked about this, but we talked about like moon effects, and like back to basics fits into like the moon discussion because they do very similar things. Of just like if like 2-color decks are a prevalent thing, 2-color decks are able to win through moon effects so easily if they're prepared for it, or if they're on like a lower budget.
They're playing enough basics generally, or like they have enough of a way to get through it.
A non-black 2-color decks, because if you're on black, you're probably trying to play Tainted Pact, which in that case you can be up to 4 basics through regular and snows. But yeah, no, like moon effects are so hard when there's a 2-color player.
It's a meta call, right? It all comes down to a meta call.
It's a huge meta call. I think moon effects are probably. I think I'd like to see moon effects like on the rise again. But that depends on how much Yuriko and Winota we're gonna see. Like those two specifically exist. Have such an easy counter against like those stacks pieces in general.
Oh, for sure. I think because Yuriko, like you only need 2 mana, and you can play the game very effectively still. And Winota is already on Blood Moon effects. They're on Blood Moon, or they're for sure on Magus, and some of the builds I've seen are even on Blood Moon because they are really good. They hose all of the decks that we live in this world of like 4 or 5 color good stuff. All you have to do is make sure that you have something to deal with their Dockside Extortionist, whether that's like a Hushwing Gryph or like a Torpor Orb or something along those lines. Or you just, if you have the ability to counter their Mana Rock or whatever, or blow it up, you do that. And then you just keep them off their colored pips, and you get it early, the game is over most of the time.
Exactly. Actually, I had a question. So if we're talking about putting in like these asymmetric, like, or like not necessarily, I guess not asymmetric, but like these stacks pieces that don't really like hose you, but hose the rest of the format, is that in itself like a indicator of health in the format that we have these things, that we're considering these things, that these things are good?
I don't know if it's necessarily like an indicator of health, but I would like. If I had to pick literally one word to describe the current state of the format, I think it would be asymmetric. Like just because at present, every effect that any deck is trying to run is trying to accomplish something asymmetrically. Whether that is you control the Drannith Magistrate, or I'm playing Grafdigger's Cage because it doesn't affect me at all. Or Containment Priest, or something like that. Like all of these things, it's just so powerful to be able to like jam a card that stops other people from winning the game, and all of your opponents are fine with it because it stops their opponents from winning the game. But then, and they figure they can remove it when the time comes, which is, you can never remove the card when you want to. It just never works out.
It's such a bad idea.
That's
too.
One of the reasons why Stacks is good. But it's like, so you jam that, and then it doesn't matter. Like you just do not care. And I think that's one of the insane things about like Elishnorn, the new Elishnorn, Mother of Machines. Like she is Torpor Orb, but only for your opponents. She's Panharmonicon for you. Panharmonicon. It's because she doubles all your ETB triggers while making sure that your opponents get 0 ETB triggers from any permanent. The card's ridiculous, and sure, it's costed at 5 mana, but there are plenty of decks that can like make it to 5 mana because 4 of that is colorless, or they have a way to cheat it into play or something like that, and would want to play that style of deck. The card's insane, and I think it's actually like, as much as I hate playing the card because I have been maining Kenrith, though that's on the line now. We'll see. Teferi, I've really been liking Teferi. It's a lot of fun. But I would say if I had to pick one word for the meta of like maybe 2022, 21, that era would have been ETB, right? Like it's
Yeah.
because like the whole thing was, oh, nobody's playing counter magic that hoses creatures, so you jam and it's still pretty low, but I think like we're making up for that in terms of removal and stuff, especially with
Yeah.
Displacer being able to abuse ETB triggers.
Mhm.
I think that like the fact that you could like throw out a creature, get the ETB, and the effect was just free. Like it was gonna resolve, you were gonna have it, is crazy. And now with like you can't say Elishnorn is the only reason, but now we're shifting away from that more mid-rangey strategy, and I think in part it's due to a lot more decks starting to incorporate these asymmetric effects. Like if you're on in Grixis and you have a way to win outside of Thoracle, like play Thoracle, but just because you're playing Thoracle and you have an ETB that wins you the game, if you're on the breach line, depending on your meta, what you're playing in regularly, it might be worth considering Torpor Orb, because
Or
that
hell, even
card
dress
just
down.
or Dress Down, yeah, those cards shut off ETB decks. They shut off creature based decks, and it's really strong. Like I mentioned, Dranith. You're a fan of Mayhem Devil. That card is becoming
Love Mayhem Devil.
prolific
Love
because of
Mayhem Devil.
treasures and how sure you can have your treasures. I care less about your dockside when I can just kill everything that's winning you the game, or kill you as you go to do your breach dynamic. Like it's ridiculous.
Nice Bomberman. I'm gonna kill the Bomberman now.
Yep, yeah, you can do that precisely like 4 times, and then
Yeah.
your
Okay.
guy's dead.
Cool. You made a bunch of mana. Do you have a way to convert 10 mana into a win outside of itself?
Yeah.
No. Okay. You're not gonna be able to do this now.
Yeah. So it's really interesting to see how that shifts, because asymmetry is the word of the day for now. I'm really excited to see where in the next year or so what the new word of the day becomes, because it probably won't be asymmetry. Like that will probably still be a major factor in decks, just like ETVs are still a major factor in decks. But maybe it'll be the new battle mechanic that's coming out. Like maybe it'll be there's like 2 or 3 insane battles, and suddenly the thing to do is to get this battle into play as fast as possible and just deal 5 damage to an opponent to have an effect that's just game ending. Like I have no idea what they're gonna be, but
I'm very like as of recording, one of the battles got leaked, so we know like kind of what they look like and mostly how they function. We're not going to get into it right here, but it's interesting. Like I'm very curious to see where they take the design space. We got to see a good one. I don't think that we talked about this earlier. Like you had brought up tribal, and just like, well, tribal is a card type, but it's been and it's like that's a card type that existed for like 1 block and was teased in Future Sight. Like I'm pretty sure this mechanic like isn't going anywhere. Like if anything, it's
I
probably
want to see more fortifications.
God, I'd love to see more fortifications. That'd be great. I love fortifications. No, I'm curious to definitely see where it goes. But I think you're ultimately right. I think we're seeing a lot more like thought put into how many of these hosing type effects are we allowed to play that doesn't hinder our game plan or doesn't hinder us enough that we care, that we're hurt, that we're just as hurt by it by other players.
Yeah.
I think any deck that can, like any Grixis deck, like just jam Curse Totem, just do it. Oh no, your Malevolent Hermit is not online. Oh,
there are a lot of decks that don't play Curse Totem where it affects like at most
2 cards
your dog
that aren't that are like don't matter.
I don't know. You say it doesn't advance your own game plan, but also if the grindy deck who's trying to stall for time can't tap their mana dorks after turn 1 or turn 0 if you have a mana crypt and go first, like that seems pretty strong to me.
Like especially with a lot of like non like Grixis or like anything that's playing green is mostly playing as many dorks as they can. I think like the one common dork that's not being played is Boreal Druid because it makes colorless mana.
Yeah.
Even the mono green decks aren't even playing that, I'm pretty sure.
Yep. Yeah. There's just better things to run.
You much rather have something that makes you colored mana than colorless mana. That's why the rocks exist, to provide your colorless mana.
Yep.
But no, being able to shut those off is so huge. Like if someone goes turn 1 Curse Totem and I have a dork in hand, I go, well, fuck. That's kind of my entire Queensland just out the window. This Dork was
Jesus.
gonna get into
Oh,
where
it's such a nightmare, bro. I played a game in our local last week, playing against zero game actions for the first time, and this player goes, turn one, generate like, I don't know, like maybe generates like 4 mana, casts after casting Rog, and I look at them and I say, if you cast a polymorph on your Rog, it's not resolving because you could flip a Sire of Insanity, and I will not let that happen on turn one. And they were like, fair enough. Promptly cast an LED, cracked it, cast their Tevish Zot, sacked their Rog, drew 3 cards, which were, of course, I'll use my 1 remaining floating mana to cast this Soul Ring, cast a Mana Crypt, cast a Torpor Orb, and then they're now hellbent, but they did recast Rograk so they could and then Ancestral Recall the next turn. And it's just one of those things where like Torpor Orb came out on turn 1 and did not leave the game until somebody was ready to win. Just because everyone
Cyclonic Rift.
Channel Odawara, but like it's the same thing. It's like that everyone is so terrified of removing that stacks piece when you get it to a high level, because if you remove it and you're not ready to win the game on the spot, like
you're tossing it to the player who's also trying to figure out their window.
They the person to your left or even to your right has it, and they will take advantage of you removing the piece that you just actively dislike. And it's the same thing with Curse Totem, more or less. Like for all you Grixis players out there, don't you hate it when your opponent casts Null Rod or like Stony Silence or Collect Roof on like turn 1 or 2, and suddenly your whole game plan flies out the window?
You could do the same thing to them with Curse Totem.
You can do the same thing to them. Hit the oof player in this right where it hurts by playing Curse Totem.
Curse Totem is a card that I try and put into as many decks as I possibly can.
Yes.
It's so
super underplayed.
It's super good. It's super good, and that and like being able to play a deck that has like Grafdigger's Cage shuts off so much of the meta.
Yeah,
so much of the meta.
That's another card. People were like, "Oh, Grafdigger's Cage is a good card," and then there were strategies that it doesn't really affect. Like maybe it shuts off a breach line. It affects a lot of strategies. We'd start by saying that, but there were strategies that it affects dramatically less than. Like just because you're on like 2 evolution effects does not a deck that you should not be playing Grafdigger's Cage in make.
Yeah.
Because that if you're on two evolution effects in your whole thing, like say you're on Evolution and Neoform, the best ones. If those are your only evolution effects, depending on your meta, you can still consider running Cage just because it hoses Breach. It hoses other people's evolution effects. It hoses Reanimate. It hoses top combos like Elsha, cast from top deck, things like that. It just stops all of that in its tracks. It's fetchable off of Urza's Saga. It's just so good. It's just so good.
It's really good. I think a lot of this discussion again boils down to like there's counterplay to a lot of these things. Like it like Grixis decks on the rise. Well, Null Rod effects are going to be good again. Like any way to stop the artifacts. Dork decks are taking over the world. Curse Totem, Grafdigger's Cage, like all of the Oppos. I mean, although Oppo never leaves ever, that card's omnipresent no matter what. If there's
it's so asymmetrical.
If there are swamps on the battlefield, there is Oppos somewhere in the deck, like almost guaranteed. But look, there's a lot of counterplay to everything. I think that's one of the things that I think keeps deck building very much alive for CDHs. Like there's always like cards you can play that stop like the big bad things.
For sure. You just have to break down your meta and think about it.
Absolutely. You just got to break down like it's the control player checklist. You know, like what are the things that I need to hit? What are the things that are bad? What are the things that I have access to that efficiently deal with these things? You know.
I mean, like we have a Grixis, we have a Kess player in our meta. They're on Bolas's Citadel and a lot of ETB effects for like Dockside and Thorgal and stuff. And their commander casts spells from the graveyard. They're playing Breach. They're still playing Grafdigger's Cage because Evolution is so omnipresent in our meta. They're like, I will not be gotted by another I'll go sack my dork to Neo form. Oh, it's going to get a dockside, and the person already has dockside in hand, so they put GA out instead. This player was just like, this will
The
not happen
classic.
to me.
The
I will
classic.
not let this happen again.
Oh god. Or my favorite, sack the dork to get Gildedrig. Ugh.
Ooh, love that
Ugh.
play. So good. So
Ugh.
good.
Hate it. I hate it.
It's
No,
amazing.
it's really good.
We love
It's
us some
really,
Gilded
really good.
Drakes. But yeah, so a lot of it comes down to meta, and I think there's a distinct difference between like a local meta that you can like very actively tech for. You say, oh, I've seen a lot of this for the past 2 or 3 weeks. I'm gonna put this in. Oh, I've seen a lot of that for the past 2 or 3 weeks, and like majors or super majors that you have to like tech for before you even have any idea what the scene is gonna look like. Like maybe you hear, oh, this XYZ deck is really popular right now. Like you hear, oh, Winota's really popular, that deck's really scary. And so you put in more spot removal than you might normally. Or you play a Grafdigger's Cage or something, whereas you might not. Because you always have the option to not cast the Grafdigger's Cage, right? And removal's never going to be a bad thing. But you have to tech ahead of time. So I think there's definitely a difference there. What's I'm curious, do you have a process when you're of preparing for like major tournaments? Do you have a process of like going through and evaluating what you think is going to be a really good card to include that you might not be playing in your locals just because you're like, oh, I know this is a deck that I could or an archetype I might be seeing a lot of?
I think for me, it's a lot of taking out whatever are like more narrow answers and trying to broaden that a little bit. I think, if Lightning Bolt isn't like super critical to your strategy, there's an argument to move on to a Braid in that slot. For example, if you're expecting more Grixis in the deck, more, I don't know, LED, more Bolus to Citadel, stuff like that. If you are on stacks pieces, there's a whole world of stacks available to you depending on your colors, obviously.
Yeah.
Shifting your stacks pieces matters so much. Like if you're expecting a lot of Storm, Thalia effects, Thorn effects are going to be way more relevant than I don't know, maybe like a Containment Priest. I'll just use that as an example.
Yeah, that's the one we've been going back to.
Yeah, if you're expecting Storm, you're going to be doing that. If you're expecting, I don't know, TNT, like Reanimator strategies, maybe the Storm effects aren't going to be great. Maybe you want to start debating if you think Rule of Laws are going to be really good. Well, maybe if you're expecting Rule of Laws, how many Winotas are in the area, how much is aggro and that kind of strategy on the rise. Is Rule of Law a good card to be playing right now? How much of your expected meta is going to be playing against that? So for me, it's a lot of, I think everyone has like, everyone plays, all the staples and whatnot, and those almost universally stay. But like the secondary or tertiary choices, that's where a lot of that play is for me. Figuring out, okay, this removal or this counter magic feels a little bit niche. Is there a more broad option I can play that will be better suited for me for either like a blind meta, or if you like know the area and like, okay, like for what, crazy to hear that CDH is super duper regional, and I love that. But if like this region is very big on Inala, and this region's very big on mono white stacks, you have those things. That's another good thing to bring up. If you're expecting stacks, you're going to want to play more mid range. You're going to want more just slow churn value cards to help get you there. That's generally my process.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking before we started recording. We were talking about like Carpet of Flowers, like even something as simple as that. Like the card's great, don't get us wrong, but we were talking about how like we don't have a lot of blue players in our meta. Might be time to cut Carpet of Flowers. Like, yeah. And even if you're considering going to a major, like think about it. How many islands is Blue Farm really running? Like even if you see a Blue Farm deck in every single pod you play in, how many islands are they realistically going to have on the battlefield? Is it worth playing the carpet and feeding the dockside by one? Or is it more worth it to maybe play like another rock of your own or a mana dork or something? Are you going to be making 1 mana versus 2? Like things like that to consider, right?
I think Carpet of Flowers is really good if you're seeing a lot of Urza and a lot of Teferi. Not necessarily like Blue Farm. You can make an argument, I guess, for Yuriko because it's 2 color, probably going to be running a slightly more island count than any other blue deck that's not mono blue. But even then, like especially ally colors. Like there's so many non-island cards that they have access to now, that it doesn't. You're not like one island off the one fetch lane that they have in hand. Yeah, but even then, another dork just might be better and more consistent. It's slower, sure, but it doesn't feed the dockside. It's always going to be there. Like the Elvish Mystic in hand is always going to produce green, whereas your Carpet of Flowers might not. We're talking about moon effects. You can't Carpet of Flowers through a moon. You
probably not unless there's a basic island.
Not unless there's a basic island in play.
There'll probably be one on average.
Yeah, exactly.
And that'll be at the high end. But, well, I guess that leads me to my last point that I wanted to talk about for this episode, which was so as we talk about like the meta and how it shifts and choosing your different cards and stuff, what if your deck is just bad? Because I think some of playing CDH well is properly selecting your deck. Because I think even say after or before card choices, there's the whole matter of like, what decks should I be playing into the expected like pool of opponents I think I'm gonna see, right? So like for me, I have played Teferi at the past couple of major events that I've played at, just because with the meta shifting more towards turbo, it's speeding up. Kenrith just in general, not the best deck in the world. Like there are faster 5-color decks you can play. So if you're gonna be wanting to play 5-color, my opinion, like shift to like Najeela NBC or something like that, which stands for no bad cards. It's just generic 5-color value pile, just like Kenrith, but uses Najeela as the commander. It's like generic on a turbo add-on strategy. So it's a faster deck, applies a faster clock in a variety of ways. And it's just as strong, but it appeals to the meta better. Whereas like Kenrith is like, it's a little slower, but because of all the activated abilities and all the text on the card, if you're in a Staxier meta, Kenrith is going to outperform Najeela way more because there will be way fewer creatures, way less removal, way fewer like things you have to deal with. But like, so I opted for Teferi for these past two, right? Because Kenrith has not been performing well. Seen a lot of green, so Curse Totem is great. Seen a lot of Breach, so Cage is phenomenal because it affects that. And then I've also been teching my pet card in that list, one of the flex slots, but a card that has been working out for me pretty well the past couple times that I've seen it, called Verity Circle. It's just one blue.
You mentioned that card.
Yeah, it's really sweet. It's 1 blue, 2 for an enchantment. It says whenever a creature an opponent controls becomes tapped for any reason other than to attack, you may draw a card. Then it has the activated ability of pay a blue and 4, tap target creature without flying, which isn't amazing. Doesn't super protect your Teferi, but like if someone has like
saves from a lethal attack.
It can save you from a lethal attack. It's a mana sink to draw a card at end of turn, even if it's not super efficient, it exists. So that's a sweet card, and it's really good in the meta right now.
Yeah, if the reasons that you listed, almost the opposite for why Chainer has been on the shelf recently, is I kept seeing Drannith Magistrates and Grafdigger's Cage, and as soon as you see those cards, you go, I can't play this deck right now. Cards like
gotta wait till the meta gets faster.
gotta. I just need people to be playing Rule of Laws, not those cards. Every other stacks card that deck can deal with, and like. Perfectly fine. If people aren't hating on the graveyard super hard and we're not seeing Drannith Magistrate and Grafdigger's Cage, we're cruising, my guy. We are cruising. But as soon as I see those cards every single game, I go, I am making the bad decision here. But no, 100%. Like being in tune with your meta and having like those other like decks that you've been like, okay, this seems really cool, or like this like side brews that you think are good, or just other known decks out there. I think the swap from like Kenrith to like Najeela probably makes a lot of sense right now, because if you are expecting to sit at a pod with let's take an extreme example. If you're expecting to sit at a pod with 3 Inalas, your Kenrith deck is not going to win a high percentage of the time, I think. Everyone's trying to go way too fast for what you're trying to do.
Yeah, for sure.
But in that point, you go, okay, well, either I have to slow all the way down to like mono white stacks, and even then they'll probably be able to play through that because you're mono white. You're not gonna have a whole lot. You're not gonna be able to stop three Nala players. So there's a sweet spot there. Absolutely, and that's That's why the dino's out, baby. I have a big beat stick. I have enough, like, I can stop one thing every turn cycle, and that's usually good enough.
That's usually good enough. Yeah, for sure. I think that it really just boils down to like keeping an eye on what isn't working, and if it just because something isn't working, because this was a trap that I got stuck in for a little while. If it's not working, it might not be you. It might not be the deck. It might just be that everyone else is playing a strategy that hoses your strategy.
Yeah.
Could also be you suck, but
it could be you're just terrible at the game.
Yeah, in all likelihood, it's if you were winning games and now suddenly you can't take a game off anyone, it's probably a meta shift. Because I know you experienced that with Chainer, and we talked about it a little bit. We brought it up before, but it's like you were taking games with Chainer, and then you stopped taking games with Chainer.
And we stopped taking games with Chainer. Yeah. No, he'll rise and shine again. That I have no worry, and that's I think especially if you're like newer to Cedh, that is like a hard learning moment to just know like the meta is going to be shifting. Like we live in a rock paper scissors world of turbo stacks mid range. Like sometimes paper's just going to be beating rock because you're expecting a lot more rock. So at that point, you need to start considering, how does scissors fit in the equation? All that stuff. I think that's a lot of what I've had to like reflect on because it's coming up on like almost a year now that I've been playing this format. So I've gone through like meta shifts very much so. So this is my first time kind of being on the receiving end of, okay, no, the meta has shifted against me. Now I need to like readjust where I'm at.
You were riding the wave and then suddenly it crashed.
yeah. Or like you had a good idea going and it's still a good idea. It's just not the right time for that idea. Like it'll probably happen again, most likely. But like right now, it's not the name of the game. You're already losing when you're shuffling.
And there'll be some champs who ride it out, and they will play the same deck the whole way through, and they will be winning, and then they will not win a game for months. Because of a meta shift. But they're playing the same deck. They're doing the best they can to tech, and they'll go through the whole thing, and then the meta starts to tweak a little bit, and suddenly they're starting to win again. Suddenly
it's the sauce again.
Not on such a cold streak, which is pretty. Yeah. It's a good feeling when that happens, but it's also okay to shift decks. I mean, we'll go back to Najeela again because like Najeela was for a long time considered kind of like the boogeyman, right? Turbo world, online world, COVID world. Fast deck, go zoom. Fast deck that also applies combat damage, go really hard. And then we started to see more stacks. People are playing rule of laws all over the place. People are playing like all of these things all over the place, right?
We had the stack summer and then the rise of mid range.
Yeah, and so but Najeela can't play into stacks. Your 1/1's just eaten by 2/2s. Like it doesn't matter if you kill like the whole board with a fire covenant if you can't win that same turn because of a rule of law. It just doesn't matter.
If you don't have the follow up for that fire covenant, they're just gonna jam
another 2/2. Yeah.
You know what Linvala is? It doesn't matter what the text is on the card. The relevant text on the card is it says 3/4 flyer. That's the relevant text.
You can't beat that.
It
also shuts down your combo, but you still can't beat that.
Yeah, the combo is extra. We don't care about it. We care that you cannot hit this card with anything because you're one board wipe. You've used it. You don't have any life. Like Toxic Deluge, I have never even met her.
Yeah, exactly.
Like it doesn't matter. Yeah, doesn't matter.
Because I was on Najeela for a really long time, and I
think when I met you, that was one of your like your pocket
picks. I had really good results with that deck after Opus Thief got banned, and so I was playing Najeela, and the deck was in a really great spot because we were still in that like turbo-y era where no one's playing spot removal, no one kills your creatures, so you're fine. And then I hit the rule of law.
Basically have
I hit the stacks effects. I hit I'm starting to lose games because I cannot connect with my warriors safely to keep them alive for the next cycle, right? And that's my transition to Kenrith. Corresponded really well with when Displacer Kitten got printed, so started experimenting with those different types of builds.
What a dominant threat in our meta! Oh my god!
Yeah, and so that was just like huge. And I think I went on during that whole stacks boom as it's kicked up in our area. Like everyone was playing rule of laws, everyone was playing stacks, except for the players who were still on more of turbo strategies. And I took the place apart. I think I went on some crazy hot streak and won for like.
It was wild. Like
it was wild. Like 2 or 3 months straight. I won every single weekly. which like some of that's going to be variance, but
Yeah.
like a lot of it had to do with like the meta wasn't adapting to where
Variance
it
for
needed
that,
to.
especially like a winning streak for that long. Like, there's only a couple of reasons. One, the caliber of player that you are playing against, just like there's such a vast ocean of difference
That was part of
that
it for sure. For
you,
sure.
like you're going to have like just a natural skill advantage. You have a natural knowledge advantage that other players need to overcome. But also, like, if you have like if you sit down at a table and three players are throwing paper and you are always playing scissors, you're going to win that.
Oh, for sure. And now as we're shifting back to more like we're shifting out of such a stacksy area and more into a turbo-y area, um, Kenrith is falling off. Not
Yeah.
so good. So now I am trying to head it off and playing stacks. I'm playing
Mm-hmm.
mono blue stacks. Just try and get the edge on that one there. But it's not to say that Kenrith isn't unviable. I did win a game
No,
last week, so that
no.
felt good. But
Right,
but it was
and that's the other thing. Is like, oh, these decks are unplayable now. No, they're still totally
still
playable.
playable.
You're just gonna have a very hard time
You're
winning
just
games. Like,
throwing paper when everyone else is throwing scissors, so it's like a
exactly.
really uphill battle.
Exactly. Sometimes paper jams up the scissors. I guess like dull scissors.
Dull scissors, they're cutting
I
it
don't.
too far forward or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't. The analogy is falling apart for that one. But like, not to say that you can't do it, but like, you're not doing yourself any favors by doing it. You know.
Oh, for sure.
Like, I could jam Chainer right now, and I'd probably lose. If only because the people I'd be playing against know what the deck does, so they know what parts to hit. And like, the meta just doesn't favor it right now. Like, Chainer specifically favors rule law effects way more than anything else. So I think if I ever go into like a meta where it's like, oh yeah, like expect to you're going to be playing with a rule law on the table every game. Oh baby, that's my jam.
You are ready for it.
I am super duper ready for it. No, I agree, and you have to decide where you want to be when the meta shifts. And I think the fact that we do have these like pretty expected meta shifts and like pretty known things, like, I think that's not the worst thing for a format. I dare say that's probably the healthiest. I think
I think that's an indicator of health. Is
it's
if
an
your
indicator of
format
health.
is rotating.
Yeah,
It means your
like
players are adaptable and your format
mhm.
is accommodating different strategies of play.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that every deck has like at least some semblance of tool to be able to fight it, and the means to find those tools on a dime if necessary. Well, I guess if you're playing mono green and you really want to find, like, I don't know, Trinisphere or something, you're gonna have
Could
a
be
hard
hard.
time finding that, for
Could be hard.
example. Yeah, very hard to find that. Or mono blue finding stasis or back to basics. Like, you're gonna have a harder time finding those, but like, the point still stands. Like, you have access to those things, so you can make use of those tools. That's why they're tools. It's why the toolbox exists. You know. All right. Well, I think I've talked about how healthy this meta is for a while.
It's pretty healthy. There was a lot to talk about this episode.
Yeah. Again, I think, are there problem childs? Yeah, but if you look at any competitive game, there's a problem child. There's going to be a best thing to do in anything that has the word competitive in front of it. That's just kind of the nature of the beast. It's just a matter of how good is that best thing, how omnipresent it is. And like, Thorkel is omnipresent, I guess, to an extent. Breach is omnipresent, I guess. Naws, Dockside, the big pillars of the format, like, yeah, they're omnipresent, but like, are they bad? I'd say I wouldn't say so. I think
Bad
a lot of my salt bad adjacent. A lot of my salt comes from like, I wish we could do other things besides these things, you know. That's a personal thing. That's not anything to do. Yeah, that's just a take. That's whatever. That's whatever. All right.
But
well,
yeah, there are a lot of do our little wrap up here. There's a lot of really cool decks making appearances at major tournaments and locals alike that we have seen and heard about. That's really neat. Meta is starting to shift, at least from what we can tell, get into more of a go fast kind of run right now. So if you're really feeling spicy, get back on those rule of law effect decks and shut everyone down. And then if you're looking to like tech your list or like adapt to your meta, just take some time to evaluate, what are you losing to? What are your deck strengths? Should I be on a different deck if I'm really trying to win really hard? And sort of just look at those things.
I'm always going to preach different win cons is the way that you're trying to win the game falling ploy to the things that the meta is going to eat alive. Can you play an off-meta win con that's going to win better? I think that's a huge part to why your Kenrith deck did so well in our meta for so long.
Oh, for sure.
Is no one was prepared for that, and no one knew how to
people
stop
didn't know the lines yet. They weren't familiar with it. And then,
Yeah.
of course, word of the day, asymmetry.
Asymmetry. Absolutely. Alrighty, everybody. Well, that is going to wrap us up for this week's episode of Man on the Rocks. I want to thank you, Atlas, for joining me for another fantastic conversation.
No problem. Happy to be here.
And I want to thank you, the listener, for sticking with us for damn near 4 episodes. That's a crazy thing. I hope wherever you are in the world, you're doing all right. We'll catch you next time.